Good day to you. Can you remember the last time you went a day without mass media? The last time that you weren't touched in some way, shape, or form by mass media? You probably can't, right? I know that I can't. What does it take today to go without media? Do you have to be asleep all day sick? Do you have to be camping? Because media are constantly surrounding us. And that's what we take on in this very first chapter of this course. It's called Living in a Media World, and that's what we're living in. We're surrounded by it, we're enveloped by the media that are around us all the time. And each day of the class, we'll be doing an instructor video like this, and you need to watch the instructor video before the quiz opens up. So please remember that if you can't see a quiz online, assuming it's after 5 o'clock when the quizzes are released, it probably means you haven't watched the instructor video. So let's get going. One of the biggest areas of growth, according to our book, in mass media is actually video gaming. Who would have thought that a console where you were playing a game much like checkers or chess or bingo or really old-fashioned games doing the same thing electronically, who would have thought that that would have spread to the internet and have become a mass way of taking in information? But it is. So people like PewDiePie and others, they're pushing video gaming into the mass media landscape as well. But long before there was video gaming and social media, there were what we call legacy media. Legacy media meaning television, radio, newspapers, and film. We're going to be covering those media in this class as well as social media. We're going to be looking at how these two intermix with each other and how they separate out from each other and how they borrow from each other and how they are combined with each other. But first, let's take on a definition of communication, because it seems like we know what we're talking about when we talk about communication. Mass media, mass communication is one form of communication. There are others. We're going to be talking about those shortly. But what is communication overall? There are many definitions, but one of my favorites is by the University of Pennsylvania ex-professor George Gerbner. And George Gerbner says that communication is social interaction through messages. Social interaction through messages. It's a very short definition, but it gets to the essence of communication. It means that when different people access a message, it causes them to interact with each other. And that's where you get the interaction, is from the messages. So when you have mass messages, you have mass interaction. Now let's talk about the difference between mass media and mass communication, since we've just mentioned communication. So mass media are those properties that deliver content that are carried through the mass communication process. They are the properties, the radio stations, the companies, the content creators on TikTok. Those are mass media. They are physical things. Whereas mass communication is a process. That's the process by which media disperse information to hundreds, thousands, and sometimes millions of people. So mass communication is a process, mass media are things. Now let's talk about different areas of communication. There's a nice chart in the book that shows this. If you want to take a look, a graphic that shows a pyramid, that's what we're going to be taking a look at. And we'll start at the very bottom. The very basic kind of communication is intrapersonal communication, I-N-T-R-A, intrapersonal communication. That's communication between ourselves. Yeah, like in your head, like when you're going to take an exam and you start talking to yourself, you start saying the questions and the answers out loud. Or even if you're just saying them silently to yourself, you're talking to yourself. When you're getting ready to make a phone call to somebody you don't want to speak to, but you feel like you have to, you start talking out loud, or you start talking to yourself, rehearsing what you're going to say. That's intrapersonal communication. It's the base of the pyramid. Moving up, the next level of communication we have is interpersonal communication. Interpersonal communication. We have a class in interpersonal communication in our major, CMST 235, interpersonal communication. That's communication between two people. It's very relationship based because it's between two people. The two people tend to know each other. They tend to be friends or lovers or family members or coworkers. Interpersonal communication is between two people. It can be on texting, it can be on a phone call, or it can be sitting opposite somebody for coffee. Next up as a level of communication is group communication. Group communication is roughly 3 to 15 people in the group. Groups consist of teams, commissions, advisory boards, executive councils, Teams, yeah, you can think of it that way. Sports teams, even. These are group communication, like when a football team goes into a huddle or a basketball team comes over to the sidelines during a timeout and the coach comes out to talk to them. That's group communication. Next up, and finally for this class, is mass communication. Mass communication, that's where an individual or an organization uses technology. That's the big factor in mass communication, using technology to send messages to large anonymous audiences. Large anonymous audiences. And these audiences are located at different locations. Why do I say they're anonymous? It's because whoever is watching Saved by the Bell, an old TV show that ran in the 70s or 80s, I think it was. Now it's back on the air as a rerun. Whoever's watching that in Los Angeles, they are joined by somebody who's watching that same show in Boston, and they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they're just part of the audience for that television show. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about anonymous audiences. Now, having said that, even though there's these levels, the internet presents a context where many of these levels interact with each other. You can have one person speaking to themselves on YouTube, and then everybody else who's accessing YouTube is watching them speak to themselves. So you've got intrapersonal communication, you've also got mass communication going on there. Now, in order to understand the world that is a media world, living in the media world, everybody has to develop what we call media literacy. Literacy was a term that used to refer to just whether you could read or write. That's what literacy used to refer to, but now it means how fluent you are in communication. There's a whole language that goes with the devices that we use to communicate. You know, my mom is 92 years old and she just got a smartphone and she's texting for the first time, and I'm trying to teach her how to do it. And I say, if you can't hear anything, Mom, when I call you on your phone, you're not answering, you can't hear it, you need to go to the icon and see whether you have a slash through the sound icon. And already I'm losing her with the language of cell phones. What's an icon? We use very basic terms like that to describe the technology that we use to access media without even thinking twice that we have a literacy. We have a learned knowledge of how to use the devices, where the back button is, where the power button is, what a volume rocker is, etc. when we're talking about cell phones. So you can read in the book about what it takes to develop media literacy. There's a bunch of different dimensions to it, one of which is understanding the language of the media. And once you understand the language of the medium, that's a singular of media, then you have a greater understanding of it. Then you can start to analyze the impact that it's having on your life. And that's what we intend to do in this class. And we're going to move to that now by talking about models of communication. Models of communication. I have some links to go along with this in the email. Every day of class, I'll send along links. You can follow along. Sometimes I'll point out the links that are going with what I'm talking about in the video, and other times the links are there for you to peruse on your own as backup context. So the first link that I want to talk about has to do with a model of communication. It's an old model. And before we describe it, let's just say what a model is, right? A model shows you what something looks like. Have you ever seen a model airplane? Yeah, it's much easier to see what an airplane looks like by looking at a model, because when you stand next to a real airplane, it's too big. You can't see the tail and the nose of an airplane, the cockpit if you like, at the same time because it's too big. So we look at models to understand big abstract things, and we're going to be taking on 3 models right now. The first of which is the transmission model. It was actually developed by 2 Bell telephone engineers, Bell being a telephone company for a long time that was later turned into AT&T. Yeah, in this model, it looks like an electronic technician design. It's got a sender, it's got a message, it's got encoding. Let's take on that term, encoding. That's one that you may not know. Encoding is how the sender decides to symbolize what it is that they're trying to say, how they put what they're trying to say into symbols. They are encoding it into symbols. If I pull up behind somebody and they're at a red light and the light turns green, and I want to let them know that the light's green and they're not paying attention, I'm not going to lay on the horn. I'm going to go dit dit, which is me trying to encode a tone. I'm trying to say, hey, not pissed off. I'm not a road rage driver behind you here. I'm just trying to ask if you notice that the light is green so I can get going. That's the encoding process. If I had laid on the horn, then I may have been trying to encode, I'm mad, I'm late for work, and you're on your cell phone and the light's green. That's a different kind of encoding. So encoding is part of that transmission model, as is decoding. The flip side of it, decoding is where the audience member tries to interpret what was encoded. And in fact, that driver in front of me that I honked at, they may have interpreted my tone of the honk to be anger. And they may have interpreted it completely different from how I encoded it. And this frequently happens in mass media, in the mass communication process. Let's go to the next model, because that model proved to be pretty inflexible in trying to understand some of the deeper dimensions of mass media. So along comes the next model, which is a ritual model. The ritual model tries to understand how and why audiences consume media, how and why. Take a look at the link that I've sent you there, where you see a bunch of females sitting around what looks like a restaurant table, and nobody's looking at each other. They're looking at phones. So why do people do that today? Well, part of it is, and perhaps the pandemic has influenced this as well, is we don't feel as at ease around other human beings as we used to. We have a lot of phobias, a lot of anxieties, a lot of apprehension, especially when we meet new people in small spaces. And so the phone provides a ritual. It's a ritual of a way to people to settle into being opposite each other in a group before they start to talk and look each other in the eye and start to risk themselves. If you want to think of it that way, you risk yourself when you talk to somebody else by exposing your ideas. And so the cell phone is helping that ritual. It's like Netflix as a date night for two people, right? You want to get together and do something? Yeah, let's watch Netflix. It's a ritual that two people may have to come together into a romantic situation. Putting music on at a party. It's another ritual that people go through. You have people sitting around talking. There's maybe some stiffness in the air, some formality, where you put some music on, it changes things, right? You put music on, it makes it a party in many ways. It's a ritual that goes along with the way that we use music. Next up is the publicity model. Publicity model is a different model than the ritual model. Publicity model looks at how media use messages to draw attention to a person or a group. How media messages are designed to draw attention. You've got a link there to ESU's webpage to illustrate this one, where warriors belong. That's one of the first things you see when you go on there. That's trying to draw attention to ESU. It's trying to, I guess, appeal to people who, I want to belong somewhere. And yeah, I do have a lot of drive to get accomplished what I want to do. Would I call myself a warrior? I'm not sure about that, but this is a place where I might belong. That's the publicity model in action right there, trying to draw attention to a person or an institution. And finally, we have the reception model. The reception model focuses on how receivers, or the audience, create meaning. That's how it focuses on. So if you look at video gamers oftentimes will assume aliases when they play video games. They'll take on characters or avatars that are totally unlike them. They'll change genders, perhaps. They'll change ethnicity. They'll change height, weight, everything about them. And what is going on there? It's because perhaps there is tremendous meaning associated with being somebody other than yourself, even if it's for a brief period of time, because the rest of your life, you're yourself all the time. And so when people get together to video game, they may not say this, but it's an observation I'm offering to you to consider. They may be doing it because it has that meaning, and it frees them up from all the boundaries and the stereotypes that go along with the personality that they've up to now been living through. The reception model looks at that. You look at Facebook groups. I belong to a Rolling Stones fan club. We get tremendous meaning out of the posts that go on there as Rolling Stones fans. They just released, the Rolling Stones, a side of an album that they had buried in the vaults since the 1970s from a small club in Toronto called El Mocambo. And everybody's talking about how great the sound is and how this little gem could have been buried for 40 years without anybody hearing it. That's what a lot of people are talking about on that Facebook site, on that Facebook user group, I should say. And it's a demonstration of the reception model and people getting meaning out of the messages. All right, so now that takes us to wrapping up our instructor video. We're going to end with talking about how mass media have evolved in the world, the evolution of our media world that we're living in a media world. And it all starts out actually with pre-mass media networks, before there were media, before there was technology to deliver messages. There were still networks of dispersing information. There were three different kinds of main networks: prior to media. We're going way back in time to the Middle Ages and even before. First of all, we have the Roman Catholic Church. Got the Roman Catholic Church, and through its teachings and Bible and the study of religion, it spread communication and meaning throughout mostly Europe. And then we have storytellers. Storytellers was another pre-mass media network. These were people who were wise. They had traveled, they had age, they were older. They were like an uncle or a mother or somebody who had been to another country, and they come back and they sit down and people gather around, like the one depicted in the link that I've sent to you. And they tell stories, and these stories often have morals to them. They have an ending where you're supposed to learn something from the story, like Jack and the Beanstalk is an example of them, or Pinocchio and lying. These are examples of stories that are supposedly have meaning to them, and that's why they're told. And then finally, as a pre-mass media network, we've got music, people playing music on instruments that they're carrying around, singing lyrics. How old is the song Row, Row, Row Your Boat? It's ancient, right? Or she'll be coming around the mountain when she comes, talking about train travel. This is music that was written a long time ago, but the words still live. All of this changes the pre-mass media networks when we eventually get the book and printed type. It's the first kind of mass medium that we're going to be talking about in this class when we get to it. We're not there yet. Today we're just doing a preview of the media, but the book, the thing that you open up, that what you're reading for this class, is the very first mass media invention. And it was powered by the printing press. We're going to talk about that. The Gutenberg printing press. That was the name of the inventor who invented it and made it possible to mass produce books. We'll get to that in this class. Then we have the electronic networks that come on after the book. The book led to the magazine. The book led to other kinds of printed materials, but then we get electronic networks. And this starts out with a technology you may not know about called the telegraph. Looks like a stapler. A stapler, you tap on the head and it creates an impulse and sends Morse code to somebody who has another one of these telegraphs at the other end, usually used on train travel. But the telegraph led to record players, which we now consider to be the forerunners of CD players. Also to radio and television. That's the electronic network. That's the next stage in the development of mass communication. And then finally, we have the internet age. That's the age that we're in right now. This is the interactive age. That's what the internet has done differently from mass communication. It allows people to touch the screen and talk back to people who are sending the messages. That's what TikTok is all about. That's what Twitter is all about. You can get to the people who are previously famous if you're lucky, or if you're skillful, or if they want to follow you, etc. The internet has added audience participation. It's added interactivity. It also has brought all the former mass media, plural, right, into one space, because you can watch television on the internet. You can read a newspaper on the internet. You can watch a film on the internet. So that then is going to wrap up our introduction to this world that we're living in. It truly is a media world. Have a great day.